Okay, folks, I don't think you actually need my face for this, so we'll start on Saint Guthlac without that little bubble and see how this goes. A few decades later, Felix used Bede's prose vita to inform his own hagiography of another English hermit saint, Guthlac. In both stories, boats provide direct interaction with the divine nature of these highly complex and sensitive environments. Placing Guthlac in real and imaginary boats through which he interacts with all elements of his surroundings, Felix deploys the mundane experience of waterway transportation to highlight the extraordinary gift of saintly contact with the divine. Like the life of St. Cuthbert, Felix's life of St. Guthlac emphasizes the hostile environment to which this hermit subjected himself. Felix writes that stretching from Cambridge north to the sea is a very long tract, now consisting of marshes, now of bogs, sometimes of black waters overhung by fog, sometimes studded with wooded islands, traversed by the winding of tortuous streams. The watery landscape seems to morph of its own accord from dangerous wetland to aqueous mist. It shifts often, revealing a patchwork of interwoven and agental elements. The Finland is at first consisting, but then studded and finally traversed by its own components. Even in his short introduction to the space, Felix emphasizes the formal and temporal ambivalence of this watery landscape. It is at once air, land, and water, yet still able to vacillate among the three. Nowhere is this fluid tension more evident than in Felix's first two deployments of boats, one pushed through watery land and one imagined in aerial waters. A man named Tatwin recommends Crowland as the perfect island on which Guthlac can make his hermitage. So together, and with Christ accompanying them, they set out on their fisherman's skiff through the fens. The journey from the southern borders of the fens to the hermitage would have been about 40 or 50 miles as the crow flies, and despite the perilous environment, Felix glosses over what must have been a considerable undertaking. So even though the Finland was probably traversed by many real boats, in this instant Felix uses the image of a boat only as an icon, recalling the New Testament of Jesus offering disciplehood to fishermen. At this point, the boat positions Guthlac as a novice under the tutelage of Christ and under the guidance of Tatwin. But shortly after Guthlac settles into his hermitage, a band of demons invades his home. They wrap him up, plunged him into the muddy waters of the Black Marsh, carried him through the wildest parts of the fen, and dragged him through the dense thickets of brambles, tearing his limbs and all his body. Frustrated by his resolve, the demons shift from amphibious tortures to aeronautical trials. They began to drag him through the cloudy stretches of the freezing skies to the sound of the horrid beating of their wings. Guthlac is not afraid until he reaches the cavern of hell and the summit of the sky. The sulphurous eddies of flame mixed with icy hail, which seemed almost to touch the stars with drops of spray. Then, let's see. St. Bartholomew barges into the midst of the swarthy darkness of night with outpoured radiance, and orders the demons to return Guthlac to his home. Unable to tolerate the saint's heavenly light, they oblige, and with the utmost gentleness bear him most quietly on the oarage of their wings, so that he could not possibly have been conveyed more steadily in a chariot or ship. In this simile, the dream ship creates a space of stability and quiet, of safe haven from the tumult of the demons' avian tortures. Whether through the hostile wetland of the fens or the flaming ice den in the sky, boats allow Guthlac to interact with the divine and demonic array of elements with which Felix has surrounded him. After the final demon scene, the next boat scene offers evidence that Guthlac's interaction with the wilderness and its inhabitants has changed. And this is like this really funny story about these birds who basically like come in and try to take stuff, and then Guthlac is just like in touch with these birds. It's actually pretty funny. But the last scene I'd like to discuss is one that is actually nearest and dearest to me. And this is actually, y'all, this is a painting that a student of mine at UNC did like 8 years ago. And it was for their creative project on Beowulf. But I just think it like really captures the kind of mood of a lot of this, the poetry and prose of early medieval England, and how kind of like dense and beautiful but still foreboding so much of this environment must have seemed. So this scene occurs towards the end of the Vita and looks, at first blush, to be a pretty standard healing miracle that showcases Guthlac's powers and generosity. In this episode, distraught parents bring their once-possessed, now very ill son to Crowland in the hope that he might be cured. This is quite different from an earlier visitation from Wilfrid, whom Guthlac knew personally and with whom he might have traded correspondence. To me, this is the real test of Guthlac's grace. Will he help the neediest? Will he help the stranger? Will he help the tired, desperate parents? We can sense tension in the passage when visitors, quote, sound the signal at the landing place and speak their first words to the hermit. Then, when the sun rose in its splendor, they approached the landing place of this said island, and having struck the signal, they begged for a talk with a great man. But he, as was his custom, burning with a flame of most excellent charity, presented himself before them, and after hearing their story, immediately seized the hand of the tormented boy and led him into his oratory, and there prayed on bended knees, fasting continually for 3 days. Now, the parents had expected to wait. They had expected to plead on their son's behalf. They had expected a struggle to be heard. But, and I do think that's a rather crucial autem in the Latin, Guthlac is eager to listen. The sound on the shore was enough. The cure, then, is a series of utterances. Guthlac prays aloud for 3 days straight, without pausing to eat. And after ritually rinsing and breathing the breath of healing on the boy, the child, like one who is brought into port out of the billows and boiling waves, heaved some deep sighs from the depth of his bosom and realized that he had been restored to health. Now, I'm a mom to an asthmatic kid, so I find myself quite moved by this scene. I can imagine ringing the bell, the thing I might have heard in church or had in my home, the signal by which monks were called to prayer and children inside for curfew, to make a sound for myself. I can imagine traveling with my husband to a strange place far from home, not knowing what would happen. I can imagine using something every day for something extraordinary, and having the sound of my arrival echo with anticipation. If I were this boy's mother, I would hear the sound bounce off the marshes and the low-lying islands. The dawn would be warming the air above us, amplifying our sound. And I would be standing there with my child wrapped in my arms, hoping to see someone emerge from a barrow, a man of God whose isolation and earthly entrenchment were supposed to be part of his holiness. Sound travels outwards to the hermitage and back with the hermit. The echo of their hope meets them at the shore. This is a soundscape and a landscape in which time seems still on the shore but sped through in oratory. Felix joins both sights and both temporalities with a simile of the boy as one rescued from a shipwreck, catching his breath as he washes ashore. The image recalls the sound of their arrival, and that first bell still seems to ring through this narrative of hope against all odds. Whether logboats, straight boats, or small rafts, maritime vessels play a central role in the lives of these English island hermits, whose hagiographical treatment preserves a partial but remarkable impression of these ordinary craft. And that's all I've got.